Hello, everybody, and welcome to Virtual Bourbon. My name is Steve Akley. We have a fun event tonight. We're going to be doing a real classic here as part of our Dusty series, IW Harper. So this one has an incredible history and a brand that still exists today. And we're going to talk about, where it is now versus where it was. And of course, we're going to be led by our buddy, Mr. Wes Hardin. Wes, how you doing, man?
Hey, Steve, how's it going?
Good, good. So, yes, and this one's a little bit different too. Pretty exciting stuff for those that weren't on early. We talked about this. Wes, you're going to be playing along when we get to the end, the Dusty game, because I did the samples here. This actually came from Jason Wickel, our friend. He had bought this Dusty and said, "Hey, I've got, I just wanted to try it. Got so, and I'll send you the sample." So he sent me the bottle sample, and then I had Justine make the labels like we normally do, and and then I sent them out then. So which is kind of cool. So Wes gets to play though, because he doesn't know which one's the Dusty. He doesn't know if it's
Nope.
A or B. So should be fun.
Ooh.
All right, we'll see how he does. He'll probably blow this thing, and then he'll lose all his credibility, and
Yep,
no
and
one will tend
this will
to
be the last one ever. We're done.
yeah, pretty like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So yeah, hey, good luck. No pressure, Wes. All
No
right,
worries.
man. All
No
right,
worries.
it's all you, but now, buddy.
All right. Welcome, everyone. So I think most everyone's been on one of our Dusty events, but just to recap for anyone, and we have two samples. Looks like they're labeled A and B. Uh, Anytime you get ready, if you want to go ahead and pour those in your glass, if you have it, give them a chance to air out a little bit. What we're going to do is along the way, I'm going to go through IW Harper brand history and distillery history and Bernheim history. And we're going to stop a couple of times along the way. We're going to nose and sample A, and then we're going to nose and sample B. What I would like to ask everyone and remind everyone to do along the way as we're nosing and sampling, just talk about, notes you get, flavors, and so forth. At that time, hold your opinions on both which one you like the best and which one you think is the Dusty. Hold that for the very end. We don't want to influence anyone else. So just as a quick reminder. So along with that, let's get started into the history. Again, we are one of these two samples, and we have no idea which one's which yet. Is a Dusty. I think it's from the 70s, Steve. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Yep. So this is a 70s IW Harper. It's one of those, it's another one of those brands we talk about on a lot of these Dusty's events. It's been around for a long time. It was iconic at one time, and it's kind of gone up and down, and it's had a bit of a resurrection lately. We'll get to that point. So if we go back to the beginning, IW Harper was founded by Isaac and Bernard Bernheim. So if you're from especially the Louisville, Jefferson County, Bullitt County, Oldham County area, the name Bernheim is going to ring a bell to you. If you're from that area, or if you're like me, you moved up here years ago and you've been around long enough. And we'll talk about some of his contributions to the community and stuff later. But Isaac Bernheim immigrated to the U.S. in 1848. So he immigrated quite a long time ago, obviously. His initial plans, he landed like a lot of immigrants did. He landed in New York, and his plan was to work for a company out of New York. And the company he went to work for almost immediately after he started working for him went bankrupt. And so he was forced to, do something else. And he found a job as a traveling salesman for a company, and his basic route, obviously back then you're looking at the mid 1800s. It's not like today. There's no airplanes, there's no mass transit, there's no fast transit. So in those times, his territory was Pennsylvania. So he traveled around Pennsylvania as a salesman. He was selling household goods to housewives or the ladies of the house throughout Pennsylvania. He actually traveled on horseback, which is kind of interesting and amazing. And what's really interesting is he actually was forced to find another job. He lost his job because his horse died. So it's, horses back then, you see all the old movies, and it seems like everybody and their grandmother owned a horse or 5 horses or 100 horses. But the reality of it was it was a luxury item to a lot of people. So his horse died. He didn't have a horse. He literally had to quit his job. So he relocated and settled in Western Kentucky, in Paducah. So for anybody that knows the area, Paducah is about as far west Kentucky as you can get. If you know the shape of the state of Kentucky, it's kind of got that little, I call it nose at the far west end. That's Paducah at the very end. And he worked there as a bookkeeper for a wholesale liquor company called Low Bloom and Company. So he got into the industry, not on the distilling side. He didn't own a distillery. He got in on the business side of it, is what it really amounts to. And he was a bookkeeper. So obviously, part of his education, part of his work history led him to that type of position. He was able to save up enough money to bring his brother Bernard over to America to work with him, and he had an idea for a new venture. So his brother Bernard immigrated over, and in 1872, they founded an alcohol. They called it a trade company back then, but for lack of better terms, they were a distribution company, is what it really amounted to in today's work. It was called Bernheim Brothers. So it was based out of Paducah. When Bernard immigrated over, he settled there in Paducah with his brother, and they started up their first company, which was Bernheim Brothers. In 1879, they registered the I.W. Harper brand name. So the I.W. Harper name is actually, if you take a really close look at any of the labels, it's actually I.W. I period W period Harper. So obviously the I and the W are initials. They had chosen, instead of calling it IW, so instead of Isaac Wolf Bernheim brand, they decided that they didn't feel like the name Bernheim really rang to consumers, and they wanted something a little more common. So they knew a guy who was a popular horse trainer at the time in Kentucky. His name was John Harper. So they just basically took his last name for the brand, and they called it basically I.W. Harper for Isaac Wolf Harper, is how the I.W. Harper name came in. So they made a conscious decision to not use the family name and go to something a little more common. They felt that it would ring with the average consumer at the time. So that's if you ever wanted to know and you didn't know what I.W. Harper stands for, it's Isaac Bernheim's first and middle name with this horse trainer's last name of Harper.
So, and Wes, I just want to be clear too, and that's like the story. It's not. I had heard before it was anti-Semitic stuff because obviously they were Jewish
Yeah.
and didn't want a brand name that. But of course, the company name uses that last name. But
Yeah.
I heard that they wanted their brand to be different. But I don't know if that's true or not. That didn't show up in your research when you were
Yeah.
doing it.
So it was. They kind of danced around that. So
Yeah, it's a sensitive
they
topic, so I get it.
they made so I didn't bring it up, but they made the decision. So the decision wasn't they didn't market test it. They didn't go out in the community and say, hey, everybody in Paducah, what do you think about, we're going to create a bourbon brand name I.W. Bernheim? Like it wasn't that. They consciously took a look at, my guess at the time, they probably took a look at what were local names that were famous, what were local names that were common. I'm assuming Bernheim kind of stood out, and they just made a conscious effort. You can argue that was the reason, but the key to it is they weren't pressured. I didn't find any research that said they were pressured into changing
Okay.
it. They always started out. It was never I.W. Bernheim. It was Bernheim Brothers Company when they started the company. But the
Right.
label and the brand was always I.W. Harper. My guess is that was probably the basis for the reason they did it, but it was kind of communicated as, and this didn't come out till years later. Like they didn't come out and publicize and say, hey, this is I.W. Harper bourbon we're selling, and this is what's behind the name. It was
Right.
years and years later that
It's probably a combination of
I would
them
say
worried
so.
about how they'll be received, and then it is a longer name. Like Gary Heingartner always says that when he started, he couldn't have he wanted a whiskey named after him, but it can't be Gary Heingartner. He's like the label would have to go all the way around the whole bottle,
Yeah,
and
it's not, to me, it's
so
not dissimilar from a lot of today's pop culture, movie stars, singers, artists, things like that. They've got a crazy, weird last name, and so let's just change it to Tom Jones versus Tom Worcestershire or whatever. There's
right,
people that do that today. I think it was that day's that day and
yeah,
times kind of version of doing something like that.
okay.
Let's take a quick break. Let's go ahead and start nosing and do a little sipping on sample A, I believe it would be.
Hmm.
See what we get here.
It seems pretty good. Little apple in there. Some caramel.
Steve,
Because
I
I
went
did
straight for the apple myself.
Mhm.
Apple
Yeah.
and caramel apple.
Yeah. Anything else of note?
Get a little bread.
Little bread, okay. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna try it.
I get some vanilla on the nose to me.
Mm-hmm.
That apple definitely comes through too.
Yeah.
Steve, do we because I didn't bottle these, are these both, what proof are these? Do we know?
Um,
The 86 or 80?
86 is
Okay, I was gonna say
yeah.
they don't really taste like an 80 for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has got even for an 86 proof, it's got a nice little like cinnamon baking spice on the end of it.
Mhm.
In
Yeah.
the back, the apple really comes through on the taste for me.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of a finish there on it, kind of sticks around, warms you the back of the throat and stuff like that.
Yeah, the mouth feels really good, and in the glass, the legs are really syrupy.
Mm-hmm.
At least mine are for sure.
Yeah.
I don't always notice that, but I just happened to bring my glass down and notice they were dripping pretty long and straight there. That's pretty good, actually. Anyone else have any comments or tasting notes on sample A?
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Okay,
Okay.
that's good.
The palate is nice and light and crisp. Tasting similar to a scotch to me, actually,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
which I'm really enjoying,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah, it's good.
It's kind of a honey sweetness to it.
Yeah,
Or maybe even honeysuckle. I mean, kind
Yeah.
of that in there. A little bit of that.
yeah. Now I'm getting that. Now that I've had a taste of it, I'm getting a little more of that baking spice out of the nose too. When I go back to it and start nosing after I've tasted this.
Yeah. There's a lot going on there.
There's a lot that's actually fairly complex. So. Any of the Maces want to chime in here? It's like Nate's chomping away at some food there, so he's not jumping in for sure. Bill, what do you think? We haven't heard it's good or it's not yet.
He likes it.
Well, yeah, I do like it. But if you were to make some cooked apples and cinnamon and make it a little on the spicy side, like a Red Hots, if it had a little bit of that in it,
Yeah.
I mean, that's
So if you made a red hot apple pie, that's
Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
I like it. I like
You're not allowed to say that.
it. New recipes. Neil
Goes with the
Melanie?
red hot shirt, Mr. Bill.
That's right.
Yeah.
Goes with his red hot shirt there.
Put
Neil and
that,
Melanie, what do you guys think?
that sounds pretty good. Put that in Freddie Mills' cookbook.
Yeah. He's working on his
I think
cookbook.
pretty much what Neil said. I get the apple and a real mild caramel. It's not super sweet. A little bit, kind of an apple pie you forgot to put enough sugar in. Because
Yeah, I didn't think. Yeah, I agree. I didn't think it was super sweet either. It kind of had a little bit of a savoriness to it. Maybe that's some of the honeysuckle will give you some of that
Yeah.
fruity sweetness without being overly fruit sweet.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that honeysuckle note was probably spot on. Kind of a little bit of sweet floral, which is what a honeysuckle is to me,
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably spot on. All right, anybody else before we jump back into some of the history? All right, let's keep moving on here. So in 1879, they registered the IW Harper brand name. We talked about where the name came from. And so they basically were today's version of NDP. So they were buying whiskey at that time. There wasn't really didn't find out where they were buying the original whiskey. My guess is if they were in Western Kentucky, in Paducah area, there was probably either a far Western small distillery that maybe was supplying, or they may have been getting it from somewhere like Glenmore in Owensboro or something like that. It's very possible they were getting something from
Green
down
River?
the river. Yeah, they were
Great.
coming from down the river in,
Yeah.
anywhere from Louisville, or it could have come all the way from somewhere like Pogue and Mason County and on down the river. But, the first few years, like a lot of current NDPs, they had their brand and their label. They're purchasing whiskey and they're selling it under their brand and label. Excuse me. In 1885, their whiskey, the IW Harper whiskey, won a gold medal at the New Orleans exhibition, and then again in 1893, it won a gold medal at Chicago's World Fair. So it was already starting to get popular. They had it out at that day and times version of bourbon tasting competitions, for lack of better terms, which is pretty common. In 1888, they moved and opened an office. They moved their operation, open office in Louisville, which was very common, even for small and medium and even large distilleries in other parts of Kentucky. Most everyone at least had a sales office and a business corporation, either in Lexington, Owensboro, or mainly Louisville. So that was very common at the time. So they moved to Louisville in 1888. And at this time, they were still selling the IW Harper as an NDP seller. They purchased the Pleasure Ridge Park Distillery in Louisville and immediately changed it to the Bernheim Distillery. So that old PRP, which is in the western part of Louisville area, was the original Bernheim Distillery. But which is a common theme as we see at 1896, the distillery's bonded warehouse was destroyed in a fire. What they actually did was they took the insurance money from that fire and they built a brand new distillery on Main and 2nd in 1897. What's interesting about that, if you look at those dates, they literally had a fire, cashed in on the insurance, and a year later were up and running in a new distillery, which is pretty. Now, again, back then, not every distillery was the size of current Bernheim or Jim Beam or Wild Turkey, one of those. Like back then, not every, in fact, very few distilleries were monstrous like that. It was
Right.
the age of a smaller distillery, but they, within a year's time frame, they cashed in that insurance check, and they actually had to go to court and fight the insurance company to get the money. So there's a court case out there. I didn't get a ton of information on it, but there was a court case that was mentioned out there where they actually they were in court for about a month and had to sue the insurance company because they didn't want to pay. And they end up winning. They end up winning in court, took their money, and built the new Bernheim distillery, not the new one it's today, but the new one, which will be the second Bernheim distillery is what we'll be talking about, is what they built in 1897. And that was on Main and 2nd Street. So that was more downtown.
Yeah.
More downtown Louisville. They marketed the IW. So at that time, they had the distillery. They're making their own. So they're not an NDP anymore. Once they had some age on their bourbon, it's a Bernheim Brothers produced out of the Bernheim Distillery product. They started getting really heavy into marketing at this time. And they used a lot of different slogans. Some were kind of cool. Some were kind of weird. One of the weird ones to me, one of their slogans was, "From small acorns, huge oaks grow." I'm not sure exactly what that has anything to do with bourbon other than the wood, but it was kind of a weird slogan to me. One of the ones they were most famous for on their slogan, the early slogans, was they've always considered this the gold medal bourbon. In fact, we'll talk about some of the history later where they actually started incorporating that into their labels once they got further on down the road. And then it's always, for a long time, it was always known as the hospitality bourbon. And we'll get into some of that detail later, because they really, after Prohibition, they really started marketing IW Harper under that hospitality bourbon. They did the whole, they did a ton of marketing with that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So we'll come back to that. Of course, Prohibition's right around the corner. They did receive a license to sell medicinal whiskey, so that helped them survive, obviously, through through Prohibition. In 1937, they sold the company brands and the distillery to two traders, Leo Gerngross and Emil Schwarzhop, who basically took those and almost immediately flipped them. They had purchased a couple of other distilleries post-Prohibition that had gone under or weren't able to come back up and had fallen on hard times. So they bought the business away from the Bernheims. And then they immediately, Leo and Emil, the new owners, almost immediately turned around and sold the IW Harper brand distilleries and obviously the whiskey to Shinley. So Shinley, post-prohibition, huge, one of the top 4 mega bourbon and American whiskey distilling companies in the U.S. So part of what Shinley owned at the time was the Bernheim distillery downtown. They set out to make IW Harper a flagship brand. So they started a new image, and goes back into this hospitality thing. So they started really pushing the hospitality bourbon type of thing. They actually created a figure called the Boeing Man. So a lot of people call it the top hat guy. They actually, when you get into like the 60s and 70s, they made decanters. I used to have one of them, but they're gone now. But they made a blue and a white decanter, and it's basically a gentleman in a tuxedo with a top hat and a cane, and he's kind of bowing, like saying hi. So they really started. Really started pushing that, and they started pushing this as the traveling gentleman bourbon. So they obviously had a pretty direct clientele they were looking for. They were looking to promote this as high quality, a businessman and a business traveler's bourbon, and they started pushing this to bars and hotels and restaurants for the hospitality side, and they really made a big push. They also, on the marketing side, they started using the Boeing Man in all their advertisements, their logos. They made those decanters. They had different memorabilia, including glassware, bar trays, clocks, plates, glass pictures. They really started pushing this Boeing Man and this traveling salesman, gentleman, hospitality kind of thing. What was kind of neat is I found a picture of an old billboard in Louisville. It was right off of the Watterson, somewhere around the 60s is based on what I saw. And they actually it was a big billboard of the Boeing Man. And when you got to the billboard, it looked like he was like reaching down and tipping his hat to like people driving under him. So they like specifically, they went big time with the Boeing Man and all of that marketing. And by 1966, IW Harper was sold, distributed over 110 countries. So if you think about it, even in 66, that's a pretty big distribution to be in 110 countries. I didn't know that either. I know that just through hunting, inquiring for Dusties, I know they were big in Japan and Asia. I knew they were big in Europe for a while, but I had no idea that they were ever in 110 countries. That's a pretty that's Jim Beam, Jack Daniels level feat there, from a distribution standpoint. So yeah, they were a top seller from Prohibition all the way to the 60s and 70s. By the 70s, sales really started growing in Japan, and Shinley was getting a premium price for exports. So the weird thing that happened, and I didn't know this either, is what they started finding out is U.S. business travelers and military people were buying cases of IW Harper in the U.S., and they were paying the import and the tariff fees, and were taking those to business trips. And if you're in the military, you were deployed to bases in Japan, and they were taking those and buying them cheap in the U.S. and were reselling them because it's not illegal in Japan, and were reselling them at a premium to such a level that it started showing a decline Japanese sales for Shinley.
Yeah. Distribution is U.S. soldiers. So it's cool.
Yeah, soldiers, businessmen, like just people going to Japan, and I'm sure it involved other countries in the Far East, but Japan was the big one. So basically, Shinley said, you know what, enough of this, and their solution was they stopped selling IW Harper in the U.S. in the 1980s, and they made it an export-only product. So they're getting a premium from export. Some of the U.S. population are taking some of their profits and their share, so they just cut off the access to the U.S. So starting in the 80s, IW Harper was an export-only product, simply based on what was one of the first documented kind of underground secondary markets that I've heard of would be people buying cases here and taking overseas and reselling. So, all of the people today that think they're doing the opposite today. When people travel overseas, they're finding, Blantons, all the different Blanton versions, and they're finding old Wild Turkey bottles, and they're buying and bringing them back over here. It originally started, at least with IW Harper, buying them here cheap and selling them at a premium. They were selling them by the case, however many cases they could get. And it was evidently lucrative enough where it still was financially beneficial for those people to even pay the tariffs to bring it into Japan with them. And they were reselling it at like a premium price over there, which was kind of interesting. So let's take a quick break. Let's go ahead and sample B, I guess it would be. And then we'll get into the rest of this history with IW Harper here.
Kind of vanilla wafers, maybe. Kind of banana-ish.
Yeah, banana is kind of what I'm getting.
I still get the bread.
Bread. Okay.
Banana bread.
Banana bread. There
Yes.
you go. All right.
Banana bread. I'll add some raisins in there as well, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Getting a little bit of like a maraschino cherry juice, almost like a Luden's cough drop kind of thing.
Yeah.
When I go back in, once I took one sip and then went back in, and that's the first thing I got on the nose was that sweet cherry juice is really what it smells like.
Again, on the palate for me, it's hitting me like an unpeated scotch, just a little more delicate, nice crisp finish. So
A little
Yeah.
peppery right in dead in mid palate.
Yeah, I agree on that. Definitely peppery on the mid palate. Kind of sticks around too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I've always been fond of this brand. I don't know
Mhm.
where it's come from, but I always liked it.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little bit of like a leather and oak on the palate. It's much less sweet on the palate than it was the nose for me.
Mm-hmm.
The nose to me initially was kind of dry wood.
Yeah, I get that on the nose.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This one's not sweet either.
No.
Mr. Bill, what do you think?
I like it.
Okay.
My first impression was it was a little on the savory side.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
sounds
that's
sweet,
what I
so,
attributed,
yeah.
like that leather oakiness to me. Yeah, it's definitely not a fruit bomb or heavy caramel, heavy vanilla. To me, it's not anywhere close to that.
And that pep-
After
that-
working with it,
Yeah.
nosing it and tasting it, several times, it's different than when I first nosed it and tasted it.
That peppery finish sticks around for a while. It
Yeah.
just kind of keeps going.
It's got really nice legs too.
Yeah.
It's kind of got a satisfying finish where you don't feel like you need to just take another sip right away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of lingers. It's a longer
Mhm.
finish
Yeah.
for sure. Okay. Anybody else? All right. let's jump back into it then. So at the end of the 80s and 87 specifically, Shinley sold the brand, the distillery, to United Distillers. And United Distillers decided, which a lot of consumers, a lot of bourbon companies at the time, they decided that the Boeing Man decanters and just the advertisements and just having it on the label, they kind of felt it was a relic of the past. By 87, bourbon's going downhill. People were trying to figure out how to keep Americans interested in bourbon. This particular brand really didn't matter because it was all export, but they still felt that they needed to change going forward. So they phased out the Boeing Man out of all of their labeling, all of their advertisements, all of their memorabilia and so forth. And they kind of started really pushing the gold medal, IW Harper gold medal. So they went back to that, like, we're a gold medal premium brand. In 1992, United Distillers built an enormous distillery in Shively, Kentucky, which is now today considered the Bernheim, the Bernheim distillery. That's a lot of people will call it New Bernheim, but it's the large distillery that's in the west end of Louisville today. In 1997, United Distillers sold to Diageo. So in 97, Diageo owned IW Harper brand. They owned the Bernheim distillery in Shively. In 99, Diageo sold the new Bernheim distillery to Heaven Hill. Heaven Hill bought it because they had the fire in 96. They spent the next 3 years after that basically contract distilling and sourcing from Old Forester, Jim Beam, a couple of other distilleries, as well as selling stock that survived the fire. So in 99, Heaven Hill bought that distillery, and they have owned it ever since. In 2015, after 20 years, Diageo sold the distillery, but they kept the IW Harper brand. I want to be clear about that. So that was a commonplace thing we see in some of the older transactions. But in this particular case, they literally kept the brand, the IW Harper brands. They sold the distillery, and then they contracted Heaven Hill to distill the IW Harper form, is what it really amounts to. So what they really did is they got out of the overhead of the distillery. Is really what it amounts to. In 2015, after 20 years, Diageo announced that the brand would return to the U.S. as a premium offering. So basically, from all the way back in the mid 80s, from the mid 80s to 2015, that was an export product of any version whatsoever, all the way to 2015. So the new IW Harper comes in an 86 proof, non-age stated, called a shelf offering is what I call it. That's one of the two samples we're tasting today. And then they have a premium 15-year in a glass decanter. So it's the little square glass decanter with kind of the raised glass on it. Very classic looking, nice glass decanter. That's the 15-year. The bourbon is distilled still at the Bernheim distillery. What's odd about it, I'm sure there's a reason why they do this. They contract distill at Bernheim. However, they aged the IW Harper at the old Stitzel-Weller distillery, which Diageo owns, obviously. But they bottle it at George Dickel in Tennessee.
Yeah, that's
so it's a bit of a kind of goes through a couple of Diageo pieces there. I didn't know that they bottled it down in Tennessee, but the other day at the store, I found the shelf version. I picked it up and took a look at it. Sure enough, right there on the label says it's bottled in Tennessee. So, or it says it's bottled in Tullahoma. And then I had to rethink it and take a look at it. And I thought it said distilled for a second, which totally threw all my information out, but I read it incorrectly. It's distilled in Kentucky, bottled in Tennessee, all by Diageo. The distillation, obviously, it's Heaven Hill at the old Bernheim distillery. And just as a note, Heaven Hill, they have a Bernheim wheat whiskey that was named after the Bernheim brothers. So just as a piece of information, we're not tasting that now, but if you're curious, the Bernheim wheat whiskey was definitely named after Isaac Wolf and Bernard Bernheim. To kind of take it, so that's the history of the brand and the distilleries. They've had 3 distilleries. It's a brand that started in the mid to late 1800s and only changed hands a couple of times. It went from, I don't really count the flip transition after the Bernheim sold it to those 2 guys and they flipped it to Shinley. So in reality, it's been the Bernheim brothers, Shinley, United, and United became Diageo.
Yeah.
And it's been that way for quite a while. So it's been a staple off and on. I've always thought it was, especially the Dusties. I've always been a big fan of the IW Harper Dusties. But what I want to do, we mentioned it earlier. I want to go through some of the kind of the community and philanthropic things that the Bernheims did. So Isaac Bernheim, he became well known for his community service and charity. He established the Bernheim Arboretum and Research Forest in Bullitt County in 1929. I didn't realize that place was that old, actually, but it's a really popular tourist site. It's right there off of, oh God, I can't remember the name of the highway, but it's right there on the way if you're going to Jim
By
Beam.
like Beam.
Yeah, you're going
Beam's right
heading
there.
to Claremont, heading to Jim Beam. It's right there on the right off of 65. And it's a huge natural forest. There's a lot of things to do. They got those cool wooden tree giants. They've just got, there's a ton of different wildlife. There's different trees. There's different flower gardens. There's just a ton of stuff to do there. So it's a lot bigger than people think it is. And I didn't realize it was open in 1929. It's been there quite a while. And it is the largest private owned natural site in the state of Kentucky, which I didn't know that either. So it's not state owned, it's still private owned through the trust of the Bernheim family. But it's the largest privately owned natural site in the state. Isaac and his first wife, he was married twice. Isaac and his first wife, Amanda, are actually buried in the forest. So there's like a grave area there at the forest. They're buried there. Their daughter, son-in-law, and there's other family members that are also buried there. So that forest is actually a place where people can go and enjoy kind of outdoors and so forth. But it's actually a family burial site for the Bernheims. As Steve talked about with some of their Jewish background and so forth, they were prominent members of the Jewish community there in Jefferson County. They were active in multiple Jewish groups and communities. He donated money to build the first library at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, right up the road. He funded the first home for the Young Men's Hebrew Association, and he funded the Jewish Hospital, which is a huge local hospital chain. There's Baptist and there's Jewish. I think Melanie and Neil, didn't Jewish just recently in the last few years merge with they either bought Norton's or bought Baptist or vice versa or something?
Norton and Baptist are still
UofL.
separate, but Jewish is a conglomerate, huge conglomerate now.
Yeah.
And it kind of purchased U of L
Or-
Hospital.
Okay, U of
or
L.
the
That's
other
the
way
one.
around.
I think
Yeah,
they.
no, yeah,
I think U of
actually-
L,
bought
I can't. Yeah, I know they're. I know
Bought
they're U of L Jewish, but yeah, they're.
Yeah, so U of L bought Jewish.
Okay.
Kind
Yeah,
of, they were, I think, on the verge of bankruptcy and had some serious
Okay.
financial problems. And yes, U of L did buy them.
Okay, so that's actually good information. So yeah, he donated to start that hospital, which is pretty amazing. In 2007, his granddaughter donated a lithograph, and it was of Moses in the burning bush, and it was inspired by Isaac's dedication to the Reform movement. She donated that to the Hebrew Union College in New York City, so it's an artifact for the college, which is kind of cool. He also financed 2 statues that are still installed in the statuary hall of the U.S. Capitol, which I had no idea, which is pretty cool. And they are the only 2 statues that were privately purchased and donated to the U.S. Capitol. All the rest were purchased by the government, or the government procured an artist or someone to build and create it. He financed those 2 statues, and those still are the only 2 in the U.S. Capitol that were privately donated or purchased or funded, which is pretty.
They're actually IW Harper bottles, which is
That's a
another little-
giant, yeah.
yeah,
giant
big
item.
advertising thing there.
Yeah, it's one's the bottle and one's the bowing, the bowing man.
Yeah.
Not only philanthropic, he was a great marketing guy.
It was great marketing.
Yeah.
It
Oh
was.
yeah.
That's how you get in 110 countries, right?
Yeah.
He financed the Abraham Lincoln statue that's outside of the Louisville Public Library downtown. He
That's
funded
cool.
that. And there's a statue of Thomas Jefferson outside of the Jefferson County Courthouse downtown. He funded that one as well. So those are two pretty popular, famous landmarks. If you're walking through downtown Louisville, it's hard to miss those two. He actually at one time went and visited his hometown of Schiemenheim, Germany. And so he came from a really small village when he immigrated to the U.S. He found that even when he went there years later, they had no running water. So he made a large contribution to installing the town's first plumbing and water control system. He also built a home for the elderly. He built a home for children. So the guy is, obviously he went back and gave back to his home village and town there. But for Kentucky, and especially Jefferson County and the surrounding area, he's been a pretty big historical figure when it comes to giving back to the community, helping the local Jewish community build up their infrastructure and so forth. So he, outside of the bourbon world, he made a ton of money making and selling IW Harper bourbon for all those years, but he also appreciated the opportunity that America gave him, and definitely has given back as well as anyone like the Browns and so forth have as well. So I would say probably the Bernheims and the Browns, as far as the bourbon industry goes, are probably the two most prominent families in especially Jefferson County area of Kentucky that have their names attached to donations for building libraries and schools and businesses and hospitals and things of that nature. The Bernheims and the Browns are probably 1 and 2 in that department for sure.
Yep.
Very cool.
So that's it.
That's it. All right.
Great.
Well, excellent job as always, Wes. Great information, interesting, and yeah, we knew it was a cool brand, and you really kind of brought a lot of that home for us. So that's cool. Well, guess what? It is now time to vote. We're going to follow. I'm going to run this thing. Usually Wes runs this, but I'll run it tonight. And so you were voting two things. One you can get wrong. The other one you cannot get wrong. You're going to be voting which one you think is the Dusty, either A or B, and then which one is your favorite. So we just do that just for informational purposes only. I'm going to follow the order of my screen. Doesn't necessarily mean it follows the order that is on your screen. We know that Zoom changes that a little bit. So I'm going to start with Kent Mace, who is at the #1 spot on my screen. Kent, which one do you think is the Dusty, and which one was your favorite? 1 and 1.
1 and 1.
Double
Okay.
ones.
Oh, I'm supposed to tell you that Nate picked 1 and 1 as well. His phone died, so he took the boys down to the beach.
Okay. All right. Or A and A as it is, but I assume the same
yeah.
thing. Okay. A and A.
Hey,
All right. All right. I knew what you meant. All right. Kevin Neely is up. One of the Neely families, long lost brother of Royce Neely, just recently discovered.
Hopefully start getting more connections there too. But I'm also going to go with A and A.
A and A. Okay. A and A. All right. Kyle Neely.
I go with A and A.
A and A. A and A. Okay. He's always copied off his brother. That's what I've heard. Always.
It's the other way around. I've got the brains, he's got the looks.
All right. So we're going to skip Wes. He's next on my screen. We're going to skip him. We'll let him vote last. We don't want him to lead anybody. And again, he doesn't know anything. He was left out in the dark on this one, but I don't want him to sway anybody. So Bill, you're next.
A and A.
A and A. Okay. So far, that's how it's going. Melanie.
I needed to place my landline call to the Brenner. It's Rick Brenner. But I liked A better, but I think B's the Dusty.
All right.
Okay. All right. B's the Dusty, and A was your favorite. All right. Neil.
I'm going to go on a limb as well and say I like A the best, but I think B is probably the Dusty.
Okay. right. Next up is Joe.
Splitting hairs here, but B for the one I like the best, and I think that's the Dusty as well.
Okay.
Right, it's making a comeback.
It's making a comeback. Yes. Danny.
A&A.
A&A. Okay. All right. Next up, Robert Mace.
I'm gonna say A&A.
A&A. Okay. Ryan Thompson.
With A as my favorite and B as the Dusty.
B as the Dusty, and A is your favorite. All right. Wes, here's where we're at. You're not going to sway the vote here at all. A is going to be the favorite for the night with 10 votes already, and A is also going to be guessed as the Dusty with 7 votes. But B finished strong and had 4 votes for the Dusty and 1 is the favorite. So what is your vote here?
This one confused me just a hair. When I first tasted A, I was convinced it was the Dusty, but B was so earthy. It reminded me of what you get with some Dusties with that kind of earthy funk type of thing. So then I really confused myself. The only thing I can go back to is when I look at both in the glass, B looks a little clearer, and we know from our last event with the 80 proof non-chill filters, IW Harper is one of those brands that pretty confident they weren't doing chill filtering when times were good and they were pumping out a lot. So I think A is my favorite. I'm pretty sure it's the Dusty.
Okay. Wes goes A and A. All right. Well, the favorite of the night is A. That we know. Again, and if you voted for B, it's okay. Because you're voting for what you personally like. But we had 8-4, so A doubled up on B. People guessed it being the Dusty, but there were still 4 votes out there for B. So there's enough people that are excited about this one, are on the edge of their seat. And I can tell you that the actual Dusty is A. A is the Dusty.
I can continue doing these. All right.
A is the Dusty. We don't have to fire Wes. It was close.
Fire me.
It was close.
It was close.
We almost lost Wes. So
almost tricked myself, and then I went.
Yeah, it can get inside your head. See, now you get to
do.
see how it is. Yeah, you go back.
It was fun. I was actually excited about being able to actually pick it blindly.
Right. So there you go. There you go. So
Well, AP, what was your favorite?
I liked A better, and I would have guessed A's the Dusty too, and it might have played into what Wes was saying. Yeah, you kind of looked at the color, but there was some. To me, I felt like there was kind of that dusty funk in there in the A, whereas the B, I get what you're saying there, but that to me felt a little bit more tannic versus dusty. You know,
I agree.
I felt like that was a newer version of what we might consider a funk, but it felt like that's probably coming from, you know, the barrel that they're using or something. So that would have been, but again, I know, so it's easy for me to be like, oh, of course, I'm an expert because I have I've got the key right here. So yeah,
right.
I'll be a genius every time you give me the key. So yeah,
Ryan, I still think we're right.
yeah.
I'm with you, Melanie. Neil.
Yeah, the B just tasted just funky, literally dusty. I mean, it just felt like it was old and had kind of lost its flavor. So that's why we went with B as being the dusty.
Yeah, I think now that I think about it, B to me, some of that earthiness I was thinking of a little bit of like had like a young wood or hay kind of note to
Maybe,
it.
yeah. That's
and that's kind of ultimately swayed me the opposite way.
well, I at first thought it was A. When I first
Until we tried B.
yeah, well, yeah,
Right.
when I first nosed it, and then as it opened up, that what made me think it was older went away. So
Very cool.
I guess that's a
good thing. I like the fact that yes, we got some of each there, so very cool. So excellent job. Let's hear it for Mr. Wes Hardin. Great job, Wes.
Thank you, Wes.
Absolutely fun stuff. I enjoy the educational part of this, so very cool stuff. So
Very interesting.
yeah, always fun to learn about the brand history, and you dig up a lot of facts that I don't know, and that was very good. So on that note, we'll say goodbye to our at-home audience, folks that are watching it, maybe tasting along with us on the video here. But Wes and I will stick around, answer any questions you got, talk whiskey, whatever you like. See you guys.
See you guys.